Welcome to BizTech Forward, your go-to podcast for cutting-edge insights at the intersection of business and technology. Let's move forward together. Welcome to the new episode of BizTech Forward. I'm your host, Anni, and today's topic is as old as civilization itself, art. But we're looking through a very modern lens. The way people buy, sell, and discover art has changed dramatically over recent years. Digital marketplaces are booming, younger collectors are influencing the industry, and data is playing a bigger role than ever before. So what does this really mean for auction houses, galleries, and online art platforms? To help us find answers to all these questions, I'm joined by Doron Fagelson, Senior Vice President of Media and Entertainment at DataArt. Hi, Doron. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Annie. Thank you for having me.
I'm really excited to introduce our guest today, actually. So Doron is the Senior Vice President for the Media and Entertainment practice at DataArt. With over 25 years in the IT industry, he brings loads of experience. Originally from London, now based in New York, Doron joined DataArt in 2015. And early in his career, he worked for fintech. But for the past 7 years, he has focused on the media and entertainment industry, covering music, digital media, book publishing, video, sports, and of course, the art trade, which is the focus of our discussion today. So Doron, again, welcome to the show. I'm so happy you're here. And, I want to start with painting the big picture. I want to understand who are our clients even. So I want to really get into that with the big one. So who are the key players in the art trade today, and what are their biggest challenges? Maybe they are all united by some one specific challenge, maybe not. Walk us through it a bit, if you will.
Yes, thank you, Annie. I'm happy to. So for us, for DataArt, I would say that our clients in the art trade tend to fall into three buckets. The first one is auction houses, and the auction houses are focused primarily in the secondary market. So that means selling artworks that have already traded hands before and they have a history. The second group would be art galleries and art dealers, and they tend to represent artists, their new works, and hence they tend to deal more in the primary market. And then the third area is the online art platforms and apps and tools. And these include digital art marketplaces, such as Artsy, for example, and also art collection management tools used by galleries or sometimes even by private collectors. So those are distinct groups, and they do have somewhat different priorities. But I would say that all of them today are really looking at a similar challenge, which is, how do they adapt, and how are they adapting to how people buy and sell and manage their art collections today? And that has actually changed quite a lot, especially in the last few years, as more younger collectors have started to enter the market. And there's actually been a wealth transfer from the more traditional art collecting generation to a much more younger cohort. So all of that is, quite an interesting situation, I think, today for the art market.
Oh, that's really interesting. And just to clarify, when did that start to happen, the shift?
I think the shift probably started happening, I would say, in the last 5 to 10 years, particularly the last 5 years. And that also has definitely coincided with technology transformation in many industries, which is really now coming into the art trade in a very big way as well. And I think that the pandemic definitely accelerated that evolution. So
right.
It's recent, given how old the art market is and how old some of the auction houses are, obviously dating back to late 1800s, say.
Exactly. So I bet this hasn't been easy for auction houses and for everyone, basically. But do you maybe have an example of a company that had to rethink the whole approach?
Yes, yes, I could give a couple of examples. So a recent example we had of this trend of how art businesses are responding to these shifts in buying patterns and collectors' expectations. It was an art advisory firm, and they became interested in developing a high-end art collection management and valuation app. And what I found particularly interesting was the main impetus for this idea really stemmed from the fact that they had no digital offerings as a company. And many of their client collectors are now younger. They're more tech savvy, and they simply expect to be able to view and engage with and manage their art collection from an app or from an online platform or channel, and to interact with their advisors digitally. So this really was an idea that was spawned from some of these transformations that we've been seeing. And another example of art players having to really rethink their business models because of those changes and how collectors' expectations are evolving is Sotheby's, when they introduced their Buy Now platform in 2020, which allows the immediate purchase of curated items, artworks at a fixed price, outside of their typical auction calendar. This really did mark a clear break from their past practice of only selling artworks either at auction or through a private sale.
Oh, Doron, so Sotheby is becoming like eBay?
Well, I won't say that they're becoming like eBay. I certainly don't think they characterize themselves that way, but they definitely have changed their business model to really provide an outlet for selling online as well as in-person auctions. Yeah.
Interesting. I'm also very intrigued by these young collectors. First of all, I need to ask Doron, like, how young are we talking? What qualifies someone to be a young collector? Who are these people? How I just want to understand for myself.
Yeah, so I think we're probably talking about the Millennial and Gen Z collectors when we talk about young collectors. I think that's where we're seeing this sort of generational transfer of wealth. As they inherit basically works and collections from their forebears. So they are now really, I would say, having a much bigger impact on the market in general because they're just accounting for a bigger proportion of buyers and sellers today. And I think they definitely have different expectations and even, buying habits from the more traditional art buyer. I would
That's a
say,
great bridge. I really wanted to ask you, what makes them so different from traditional buyers? Well, what is it that they bring?
So maybe we could start by trying to describe sort of the more typical traditional art buyer and the typical model that has often characterized this trade. The traditional model is really much more relationship driven, I would say. I would say that traditional collectors have tended to rely on personal relationships with art galleries, with dealers, and with advisors. The younger buyer, I would say, is not as dependent in that same way. They're more digital first. They definitely are more comfortable making purchases of artworks online. And I think they also expect more data-driven recommendations because they're just so used to being more engaged digitally in general in their lives and using data in many of their different habits and workplace practices and so on. So they aren't just only relying on expert opinions. And one piece of evidence really of this is actually the 2024 Art Basel and UBS survey of global collecting, which is done by Art Economics. And that survey found that it's often the case that an online art platform and many of those art platforms do now incorporate recommendation engines. They could be used as an initial way for discovering and sourcing new works and artists, even if ultimately the sale of an artwork might still be through a gallery or an auction house, or even directly with an artist. So it's really interesting to see how digital tools are really figuring into this discovery process much more today for this younger generation. I know the report also found that when a collector is targeting a specific artwork for purchase, high net worth individuals, which tend to be obviously the top end of the buying market, they've become much more comfortable purchasing the work online without even seeing it in person or actually visiting the gallery. It's quite striking that the report notes that buying directly through a dealer's website was actually the second most used and sort of second most prevalent route for spending money on art through a dealer or gallery. But it was actually the most preferred one for the high net worth individual cohort in 2024. So I do think those are pointing really to trends showing how this younger collector base is having much more prominence and influence as a core demographic of buyers in the art market today.
Oh, wow. And you kept mentioning the digital tools and trends and how technology plays a big role as well, obviously. And I want to stay here a little bit. So would you walk us through the main trends that stand out technology-wise right now? What are some of the biggest trends you can think of?
Sure. So I think I would point to three broad ones that I would say stand out. The first is, I would just say the volume of online art sales today. It's really no longer this sort of niche market or, very sort of small slither of the market. I think we're seeing both volume and also in terms of price, collectors being more comfortable buying artworks online. Now you're starting to see really major works being sold digitally, not just works, say, below $50,000. For example, I know in 2022, online sales accounted for about 16% of all art sales worldwide. That was just under about 11 billion US dollars. So that is quite significant. I would say the other trend is AI-driven curation. Very recently, I think a lot of the personalization recommendation engines are leveraging AI, and those are definitely helping collectors to find artworks that they love more conveniently and easily. And then the last trend in terms of sort of interesting technologies coming to the fore, I would say, is immersive and interactive experiences, particularly in the cultural sector. You can think of virtual galleries, right, where you can access the works remotely, and also AI-powered museum guides. Really starting to see a lot of those kinds of projects being implemented with great success. A recent example is the Smithsonian Art Museum. It recently partnered with Toosly.ai to launch an AI-powered audio guide that really offers AI-tailored content and data-driven curation, and obviously enhanced accessibility. And in just three months, that guide attracted something like 35,000 users. So I think that's really a great indication of how technology is really becoming much more of a main driver of modern museum engagement today.
Oh, wow. That's so cool. I wonder if the Smithsonian Museum is are they the first ones who did that? Or will everybody else follow their lead, or did they copy someone else? I just wonder.
Yeah, I don't believe that they were the first, but I do know that they've had perhaps the most success with it. And I certainly think that given their name and their brand, I think that that makes a lot of waves, and it certainly encourages other museums to follow suit. But I've definitely seen other examples as well. The last couple of years of this kind of AI-powered tool really helping museums to engage their visitors better.
Right. Doron, and since we're talking about trends and technology, I cannot not mention data. Also, I must say that this episode for me is a bit like a dream come true because we both work at DataArt, and I've always wanted to just be like at some point, hey, we are from DataArt and we're talking about data and art. So finally, I said this sentence, and thank you for this, Doron. So now, like jokes aside, really data. Data seems to be a big force in the art industry as well. So, what are some of the biggest ways actually impacting the industry? How? Why? What is happening data-wise?
Yeah, it's such an important question, Annie, and I think it, really does justify a lot of attention and focus today. And I think definitely art businesses are trying to think through more how they can leverage data as an asset. And I think two of the big ways that it's certainly being implemented and leveraged. One is the actual digitization of information about art. So all the ways that you can enrich and augment artworks with metadata that's meaningful and that really provides descriptive attributes of data, how you're categorizing the different artworks and how you can then use that to really provide great curation on your gallery website or your online platform. That is really essential to helping the collector find artworks more easily and discover things, and really helping artists to promote their work as well. So that's one area, is really the whole aspect of data enhancing the artworks as objects and as assets. And then the other area is very much the focus on the end user and the collector of some of these tools and platforms. So data is really very much helping companies to understand buying behavior, helping to analyze different collectors in terms of their preferences, their behavior, right, their buying habits and their history, and therefore offer them much better insights and recommendations. So for me, I think why data is so core to the art trade is that it really is a very important foundation for how you're able to personalize to collectors better and help to improve the discovery process, especially for online art marketplaces today that have so many, hundreds of thousands of works in some cases. And it's really also how businesses can create this sort of like digital footprint or digital collector profile based on the interests and the tastes of the collector, how they interact online, what artists they follow, which pages they visited, and how many times they might engage with a certain artist or genre of art. And then, of course, the more accurate you can make that collector profile, and the more sort of data attributes you can add and collect and maintain to describe artworks, the better your personalized recommendations to collectors will be. So it's very much, I think, a backbone of how platforms are managing art collections and inventory online, and really central to businesses trying to show their customers more relevant artwork to those collectors' needs.
Right. It definitely doesn't sound like data is just some trend. It sounds that it's essential. It's the thing, and it's not going anywhere. And actually, we're gonna be getting more and more of data talk, and rightfully so. And speaking of what we're going to be getting more of, or generally about the future, I wonder if you have any kind of thoughts on what's going to happen in the future, or looking ahead, what should art businesses focus on to stay up to date, to stay competitive, to stay kind of cool, you know?
Yeah, it's so important that businesses are thinking about, the future and how to sort of increasingly remain competitive in a difficult market, especially today. It's not been a particularly easy year over the past year for the art market. So finding ways to really augment your offerings and reach more collectors and just stay competitive is important, I think, as ever. I would point to, I think, maybe 3 focus areas here. The first, I would say, is digital transformation. Essentially means investing in digital solutions to streamline operations and create efficiencies. So, for example, can be allowing the actual transactions of art to be much simpler, more seamless, or on the sort of back office side, generating customizable forms for consignments and loans easily and effortlessly, solutions that help to enhance and expand online channels for sales. In the case of museums, providing more interactive and immersive experiences using augmented reality, virtual reality. I would say the second area to really focus in on is personalization. Again, we've touched on this. It's about understanding customers' needs better, offering tailored solutions and recommendations based on those needs, and providing insights that can really enhance the customer satisfaction and loyalty. And the third area I would say is data and analytics around data and how to leverage data as an asset. This can be to understand the art market trends better, get insights into collectors' preferences and buying habits. That can really also help to inform marketing and customer outreach strategies and inventory decisions, and really allow art businesses to be more responsive to fluctuations in the art market, or just generally how collectors' needs are evolving over time.
Doron, and is there anything in the tech and art space that you personally are right now excited about? Something that you follow, you personally, like maybe there is an app, a particular museum, a book, some development, something that is under the radar, something that you personally are excited about. I'm just very curious to ask.
I think that I'm mostly excited about where things are headed. I think that we're at such an important juncture in the art market, and there are so many interesting technologies that are really having much more of a place in how art is bought and sold and discovered. And I think that what's really exciting about all this is that I think it's really empowering collectors as never before. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing how all of this will just make the whole experience of collecting art much more valuable and much more meaningful, and hopefully ultimately helping to expand the art trade as well.
Yeah, that's great. I do have one more question for you. I know that you are quite outspoken about art, about technology. You publish articles, you give comments, and I always wanted to ask you, among all the opinions that we hear and read, do you have any unpopular opinion about the art world today?
Ooh, that's a tricky question, Annie. But I think I'm happy to offer an opinion that I think perhaps is not necessarily a popular opinion that I have. So I would say that my view on collectors' trust in institutions is that in general that trust has been a bit in decline. And I think that what's happening is I think that collectors' trust is starting really to move away from being centralized in institutions and among art professionals and more to individuals and to art communities that have been formed around the internet and social networking platforms. So I think that it's kind of a trend towards a distributed trust model versus a centralized trust model, which I think is really quite fascinating. And I think this is definitely affecting the business models of major art market players that have really in the past traditionally relied very much on really sort of owning that collector trust and how that collector trust has really empowered their brands and driven their success.
Oh, wow. I'm intrigued and curious. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Sure. So I learned quite a lot about the dynamics of the art market and also about the psychology of art collectors from Don Thompson's book, The $12 Million Stuffed Shark. And he, in the book, discusses an important concept that really does impact art collector psychology significantly. He refers to this concept as brand equity. And he goes on to describe brand equity as being consisting of various types of branding that collectors are looking for when they're purchasing art. And that branding actually provides a locus for trust. So art could acquire brand equity in different ways if you bought an artwork at a prestige auction, right, like a Christie's evening auction sale. If you bought it from a branded artist like, say, Damien Hirst, for example, or a branded dealer or mega gallery like Gagosian, or even if the artwork that you purchased had a history of being on display at a prominent museum. And so much of an artwork's provenance, right, essentially its history and what contributes a lot to its value, is actually determined by these branding moments in its history. And what Thompson argues in the book is that many art collectors are actually inherently insecure about buying art. And what they do is they fall back on this kind of branding to compensate for that insecurity. He actually cites the insight of Howard Rakowski, a former director of Bonham's Auctioneers, who said, never underestimate how insecure buyers are about contemporary art and how much they always need reassurance. So, in other words, the collectors tend to suffer from a lack of certainty when making a buying decision or selling, and they've traditionally looked to art institutions, art professionals for guidance and for reassurance on what to buy or when to sell. So my view, my unpopular opinion here is that, at least in recent years, as we've seen this technology transformation reshaping the art market, we've seen the rise of these online art platforms and marketplaces, and in tandem, this emergence of a younger sort of digital first generation of collectors. What's obviously been happening is, how people discover and learn about and acquire art is really changing. And it's becoming much more data driven. So now many of these activities of how you would research art is happening online, it's happening over social media. And so there's even more interaction now directly between artists and collectors than ever before. For example, as an artist moves more of their work to Instagram and they create a following, and then they're directly in contact with their own fans that way. So collectors are definitely becoming more educated about art. They tend to do a lot more of their own research. I think that also means they're less insecure. And I think that this development has started to erode, this concept of brand equity for many collectors. I think they're less dependent on that. And it's changed how they think about trust. So art institutions, major players like auction houses, galleries, dealers, and museums, they're responding as well, with alternative business models that are relying less on branding. And they tend to emphasize easier access to art, transparency, convenience, and the value of data, both for internal usage within their own organizations or externally facing products for their customers and collectors. So the main point is that I think we're really living through a very exciting time in the art world, but it's also a very disruptive time, especially for many art market professionals. And I'm sure that not everyone feels excited or happy about that.
Well, I love that perspective. And actually, it's interesting because it sounds like data actually helped with this lack of insecurity. So this quote that you quoted about buyers being super insecure about contemporary art. So with data, they don't need so much reassurance anymore. So is this quote a little bit less true because of data? Sounds like it.
I think so. At least I certainly think so for the younger cohort. I think there are certainly still many collectors out there who definitely do value the advice of art professionals and still use advisors in their purchasing decisions or selling decisions. But I do think some of that at least is shifting. And I think overall that's a good thing. I think that a more informed buyer is a more determined and more enthusiastic buyer. And I think that will ultimately be something that is good for the health of the art trade.
I really cannot stop asking you questions, Doron. I'm sorry, but I have to stop somewhere. But I really hope we can come back to that conversation. For now, thank you so much for this chat. It's been really a pleasure.
Thank you. Likewise, I've really enjoyed it. And I would certainly love to come back at a future point and pick up the discussion where we left off.
We will do that. And to our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed the episode, please like, share, subscribe. And remember, we always want to hear from you. Any thoughts, questions, insights, email us at biztechforward@dataart.com. That's all for now. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to BizTech Forward. If you enjoyed the podcast, please subscribe and share to help us reach more listeners. Thank you for being part of the conversation. See you next time.